Namaste and greetings. I, Avi Sharma, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान नई दिल्ली, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Learning. IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, New Delhi, proudly presents the fourth cohort of the LPPYF Law and Public Policy Youth Fellowship, Cohort 4.0, Winter 24. Guided by the theme Inclusivity in Peace and Conflict Resolution, Rethinking Policy, Advocacy, and Implementation. This fellowship is dedicated to fostering a society where inclusive approaches are central to peace building and conflict resolution efforts. To kick things off, let's begin with a concise overview of the program. Building on the success of the previous cohorts, we are delighted to offer this comprehensive program designed to equip aspiring policymakers, researchers, and legal enthusiasts with valuable skills and knowledge. In this unique winter fellowship, participants will dwell deep into the realms of peace and conflict resolution, exploring historical contexts, contemporary challenges, and potential solutions, led by experts in the fields of law, public policy, and human rights. The program offers a holistic learning experience that combines the theoretical knowledge, interactive discussions, and practical case studies. Additionally, participants will submit a creative project research essay as part of their learning journey. The chair for this program is Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor IMPRI. The lead advisor and legal hands-on session expert is Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam ji, visiting senior fellow IMPRI, advocate, author, and researcher, gender and human rights. The expert panel includes Professor Asha Hans, Mr. Sandeep Chachra, Professor Swaran Singh, Professor Seena Paul, Advocate Flavia Agnes ji, Professor Naila Ali Khan ji, Ms. Wahida Nayanar ji, Dr. Linda Lane ji, Professor Anuradha M. Chinoy ji, Ms. Tuti Roy ji. The expert panel for today includes Mr. Sandeep Chachra ji, Executive Director, Action Aid Association India and Advisor, IMPRI. Ms. Rita Manchanda ji, Research Director, South Asia Forum for Human Rights. The conveners for the program, Dr. Ajay Gudavarthi ji, Advocate Celine Thomas ji, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, and Dr. Arjun Kumar ji. We welcome you to join us for an immersive journey into an impactful law and public policy youth fellowship. We will also share the course outline and reading resources in your email for your kind attention. Before we start today's session, I would like to state the housekeeping announcements. Please join the meeting on time. There will be a Q&A session after each presentation. Share your question on the Q&A box. The questions must not be posted as an anonymous attendee. Ensure that your questions are precise. Refrain from making general comments in the questions to save time. To begin with today's session, I would like to invite our chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished Professor IMPRI, to give her opening remarks. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, Avi, for your introductory note. And today we are in day one. We are kickstarting this new course on inclusivity in peace and conflict resolution and rethinking policy, advocacy, and implementation. It's a demand of the day. I think all of us are really concerned about peacemaking, peace building, and peacekeeping. I congratulate conveners Dr. Ajay Gudavarthi, Advocate Celine Thomas, Dr. Simi Mehta, and Dr. Arjun Kumar for envisaging and executing this course in such a short notice. And welcome today's expert, Mr. Sandeep Chachra, Ms. Rita Manchanda, and Advocate Dr. Shalu Nigam. The issue of societal inclusion in peace negotiations as an agenda item has gained increasing importance in politics, policy, norms, and scholarship over last few decades. In India, it happened more so after the communal tension that we experienced in the early 90s, and so many organizations which were completely dedicated to issues of peace, they came into existence. It's a question of domestic peace, but also globally. Currently, at 48 geographical locations wars are going on. It can be either territorial war or civil war, but everywhere the peace is a very important concern for those who are concerned about the future of humanity. Inclusion has gone from being considered as unnecessary disturbance, like civil society inclusion was earlier seen as an unnecessary disturbance, to the necessary step in peace processes, especially due to its growing association with the fostering of political legitimacy and peace sustainability. If we want a sustainable, long-lasting peace, then it is important that the civil society organizations and the citizens are also involved in the process. Instrumentalist approach toward quote-unquote civil society inclusion in peace process obscures its fundamentally political nature and its implications, and agnostic principles such as contestation or dialogue or pluralism or dissent should therefore be incorporated into the negotiations of the peace agreement in order to alter the overarching structures of power and relations among the parties in conflict. In the agnostic peace process, for example, like a former enemies ideally come to see themselves as sharing a common symbolic space where conflict is played out and regulated by procedures and platforms accepted by conflicting parties in a peace agreement. Instrumentalizing and depoliticizing political inclusion is hurtful for democratic safeguarding of previously denied rights and the counterproductive even for minimal legitimization ends. Peace building benefits from agnostic standpoints of the analysis by introducing, say, from negotiation stage, a political model of engagement that allows in conflict by peacefully tackling the issue of conflict and peace instead of sweeping it under the carpet. We have the three landmark peace agreements, which have also provided the framework for peace negotiation. First one was the Oslo Agreement in 1993. The Oslo Accord were supposed to bring about Palestinian self-determination in the form of Palestinian state alongside Israel. And this would mean that Israel, which was formed on the land of historic Palestine in 1948 in an event Palestinians known as Nakba, would accept Palestinian claim to national sovereignty. The claims, however, would only be limited to a fraction of historic Palestine, with the rest of the left to the Israel sovereignty. Now, that was the one which was a watershed in terms of peace negotiations. We know that it has not been respected in the current context with the new traditional war that has come up in the Gaza Strip. The second peace agreement was the Belfast Agreement in 1998, which was signed on 10th April 1998, that ended most of the violence of the troubles of political conflict in Northern Ireland that had ensued since late 60s. We all were used to, anytime we went to England, there would be area would be cordoned by police and would be declared that there is a bomb, or the bomb scare or bomb blast that used to be regular in England before 1998. That stopped. It was a major development in Northern Ireland peace process in 1990s, and Northern Ireland's present devolved system of government is based on that agreement. And the third element was that of a Colombian peace agreement in 2016. Lot has been debated in the feminist circle also, because 1,000 women had signed the peace agreement that they had demanded that they wanted even in the feminist foreign policy, if there should peace, it should be the pacifist policy. The comprehensive rural reforms, political participation, end of the armed conflict, illicit drugs, transitional justice for victims to provide recognition to victims, and enhance the trust of individuals in the state institutions and reinforce respect for human rights and promote the rules of law as a step towards reconciliation and prevention of new violations and implementation. Monitoring has happened. We have seen that so many of social activists, human rights organizations, international NGOs have taken part in the negotiations, whether in the International Criminal Court or in the advocacy, global advocacy for the peace endeavor. Today, we have one such expert, Mr. Sandeep Chachra, who is also going to focus on decolonizing peace building and democracy, views from Global South in his inaugural speech. We also have Ms. Rita Manchanda, again, a person who has given best years of life in the peace initiative, and she also edits a journal dedicated to peace, and we are also going to have discussion following that. Thank you. Over to IMPRI.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Without any further delay, I would now like to invite Mr. Sandeep Chachra, Executive Director, Action Aid Association, India, and Advisor IMPRI for his inaugural speech on decolonizing peace building and democracy, views from the Global South. We welcome you, sir. Over to you.
No, thank you. And while welcoming all the participants, very warmly welcoming all of us who are here for this very important course, if I would say, privileged to be here. It's very nice to hear you. And I want to commend the chair of today's session, Dr. Vibhuti Patel, and of course, the entire IMPRI team, the advisors, the course coordinators. Dr. Arjun, you are here. Dr. Simi Mehta's name was taken. Dr. Cecile, so many names. And Avi, of course, you for moderating these discussions. You know why I want to applaud and congratulate you? Because you, in my talk, for instance, the topic for which you're given, you talk together of decolonizing the question of democracy and peace building together. So I want to sort of, first of all, applaud that linkage, which is not just a philosophical linkage, but a material linkage for majorities on our planet. So thank you so much for that. And therefore, positing the deeply interconnected nature of what we are talking of decolonization, democratic or democratization, and the quest for democratization, and the challenge of what you've called peace building. Dr. Patel was, of course, introducing the peace agreements and the failure of those peace agreements, some of them at least, in a historic manner, and taking the case of Palestine, which is anyway topical, and the quest of what is called peace building that people await. In doing so, you see, I want to draw attention, and I'm going to, in my address, take recourse to some of my notes in order to be clear and also crisp and maintain time. And I assume I have about 20 minutes or 25 minutes. Please guide me, Dr. Patel. But that's how I position myself. So I want to say, you see, liberation from one of the greatest oppressions of human history, one of the greatest oppressions, killings, mass plunder, organized plunder in human history, and for continued up to more than 300 years, what we call colonialism or colonization, has been one of the largest mass struggles, popular struggles across of the tricontinental South that human history has witnessed. This is the 20th century largely. I'm not just here talking of India, but you can take to nations in what is now new nations in Africa or recrafted nations in Africa whose boundaries were drawn by the colonizers themselves, or elsewhere in Asia, or in the southern parts of America, which we call Latin America and other bits. So that liberation, that whole mass struggle for liberation has been one of the largest movements known in human history, struggles in human history, to come out of one phase of oppression. But I must say, in this century, a next task, if I were to say the phase 2 of the task in non-reductionist manner, the next level of the task awaits us, which is of the second phase of the topic that you have talked about, decolonizing futures, decolonizing the human futures. And I think this task is fundamental and needed to be advanced in terms of the autonomous perspectives of the majorities of people on our planet who happen to be in Global South, as well as the majorities of nations on our planet, in terms of how they will or should embrace future and need to embrace future. By decolonization, therefore, I turn to what I mean by decolonization, because there are many, many captures of decolonization. But let me be clear about what I mean so that I set the basics very clear. By decolonization, in a very basic way, the point is of the task of freeing people, of freeing humanity from the deep, abiding, and continued effects of what is called colonization. Let us be very clear on that. That's a deep task. It's a task, and freeing is a task which is long, often violent. You will see it, you're referring to 46 ongoing wars. A lot of them are wars on decolonization, including Palestine that you spoke of, Dr. Patel. So it's a deep, often violent, and an arduous project. It's hard project of self-determination. And from the school of thought I come from, let me be also clear that by decolonization, the task of decolonization encompasses a vast array of institutions, of thinking, not just cultural, not just limited to cultural symbolisms, of return of artifacts, or of languages, and so on and so forth, but a task which involves thinking, constructs, land, and people. Let me take an example. Let me take the example of Aboriginals in Australia. And let me illustrate what the task is really. At the point of colonization of the continent of Australia, the numbers of Aboriginal people, and these are historical estimates, and therefore a range of those, in the year 1788, that's when the records can have some relevance, were between 750,000 to about 1.25 million. So between that, the populations which roamed around the continent of Australia, 600 tribes, 250 different languages. This is 1788, not nearly less than, I would imagine, 300 or 350 years ago. By the time when Commonwealth of Australia was founded, and another, different phase, this is in 1901, the numbers of Aboriginal people, entire population had reduced to 90,000 people, just 90,000 people, 1/10 roughly of the numbers which were there in 1788, a result of well-established massacres, which in those years were called frontier wars. And today, another century and a quarter later, although the populations have climbed back, what is the situation today? We have Aboriginal people contained to small patches of land, contained to some kind of charitable welfaristic benefits, and apologies. Every now and often you hear apologies. The latest being the apology when the king of Australia, Charles, King Charles, was visiting just a couple of weeks ago, when there were protests all around that you are not my king. The point is that without substance, apologies every now and then, and certainly with limited territories. This is not to say that the struggles don't exist. This is not to say that decolonization struggles don't exist. Let me elaborate a bit further. And therefore, the task of decolonization, and as my late teacher, the late Professor Samir Amin, a well-known global thinker, activist on our planet on the issue of decolonization, delinking, and third world politics, would say, the task of decolonization involves 4 fundamental aspects, if not 5. Let me talk of the 4 primary aspects. First of all, decolonizing the political economy of the global system. What do I mean? This means doing away with the socio-economic and political distortions that have prevented in the past and continue to harass and prevent in the current time the development of third world. And I will explain it how. And the challenges, 1 and 2, the challenges of neocolonialism, or the continuation of exploitative colonial practices even after political independence, even after the first phase of decolonization, limited as it may be, critiqued as it may be, bourgeois-led as it may be, into the formation of new nation states, but nevertheless a Herculean mass struggle to even get there. The second task, I think, and importantly, as Samir argues, and I argue, is the decolonization of the monetary system of the world. Now, this is a topical matter, not because franc, CFA franc, is used still in Francophone Africa, meaning in the French colonized countries of North and Western Africa. It's still used. The currency is CFA franc, which is a Francis currency, or the French pegged to the French currency. But also because the dollar hegemony, which is being challenged. The task, therefore, is to ensure alternative economic integration based on national currencies, a task which the global south, through the engine of BRICS, uneven as it is, some countries more pushing, some countries moderating that and actually fragmenting that, wants to develop an economic integration minus of the colonial sort of formations, minus of the dollar hegemony, and minus to escape the kind of sanctions regime that the neo-colonial powers still continue to harass the world. More than 30 countries of the world are sanctioned countries. The number of sanctions in Russia today are 5,000. Cuba, historically sanctioned, historically harassed, historically responsible for deaths of children, and numbers of children in Cuba, has been sanctioned ever since its liberation struggles, ever since it's decolonizing its yoke from the hegemon called the United States of America. So therefore, this remains an important pillar of what I call decolonization. I'll turn to democracy soon. The third aspect, which is very pertinent to the question of peace and democratization, as was indicated by Dr. Patel in her opening remarks with reference to the introduction to the course, is the question of decolonization of the global system. The new world system, or the modern world system as I call it, is based on centrality of a few. Nowhere is it more evident than the United Nations normative system, the global normative order as they call it, an evolution certainly from the League of Nations, which was historically northern, democratized somewhat, but still with checks and balances such as the Security Council, and therefore the need for reform of Security Council. I'm not getting into propositions of what needs to be done. We can discuss it in the course over the next weeks, but certainly which continues to exploit the core countries, which continue to exploit the peripheral countries through the primacy of institutions like the Security Council, and through what Samir Amin called, and heterodox economists call, political economists call, the global law of value. Now, what is this? It's important to understand this in the passing, at the basics of it at least. A system of unequal exchange in which the difference of wages between the labor forces in different countries is not related entirely or even totally or even solely to product differences in productivities. One may argue that labor force in different countries have different values because they have different productivities. It's not the case. Amin argues that the unequal exchange is when, and the global law of value is such, that the differences of wages between the labor forces of different countries is not based on productivity, but is greater than the difference between their respective productivities. So, in simple words, certain labor is valued more. Certain labor is a disposable commodity of certain countries. And guess where this labor comes from? And that is why activists, thinkers, progressive economists argue for a global South Commission on Labor, because that's at the very basic of this global law of value and a continued neo-colonial exploitation, which is sanctioned by global systems and world systems that I speak of. Not unimportantly, but importantly is, and centrally, is the question which Fanon wrote about. Frantz Fanon, please read him. The question of decolonizing the mind, the question of ensuring that the futures are not ridden with neoliberal bourgeois ideas of progress and accumulation, but rather and therefore controlled by institutions which keep large majorities oppressed, in precarity, in precarious perpetuity, and in forms of what may be called forced labor, and a new social class emerging, the class of what is called people without work, or what is called a new social construct, that people are not refugees among them, who are out of work people, or largely out of work people, or totally underpaid type of people, historically, and a new social class as well. Having said this, there's also a merit in the argument, friends, and I think this is a debate we should have, that originally democracy, I use the word in a more substantive way, but in a limited way as well, both, was a project of decolonization. Now, this argument is an argument which has been fairly talked about, but let me give you the example of America. Originally conceived as a project of decolonization in independent America after the British colonial sort of phase, or the American assertion of independence, let me put it, of settler independence, I'll come to that as well, yeah, was this whole question of American constitutionalism in the traditional civil political rights frame, the voting frame, or the liberal democracy frame. Black radicals, even then, William Du Bois among them, I remember, always argued what Dr. Ambedkar argued in India. And what was that argument? That the end of legal inequality, would it be enough to uproot subordination, caste subordination in the case of India, racial subordination in the case of United States of America? Now, this, therefore, assumes a more progressive orientation of democracy from a representative, liberal, contained, elite-controlled variety to an authentic democratization, which is grounded social democratization, economic democratization, and political democratization. But that is not what we see. So, therefore, the question of colonization, neocolonialism, and is embedded with the limitations, saddles the limitations of how democratic project can take off towards its authenticities. William Du Bois, as he was speaking to an audience in Haiti, a country that was totally occupied and owned by the United States of America at a particular point in history, and when he was speaking to people, he said that there are several colonial circumstances, and I do want to read it out, and that in case of Haiti, the owner of this country is owned by one which is liberated, which is the case of America, right? After American independence. But he argues, and he said that this included in the US groups of people, I'm illustrating this point, groups of people, the blacks, then called the Negroes in the USA, who do not form a separate nation, and yet, and in their conditions, resemble in the economic and political conditions a distinctly colonized status. You can transpose this argument or this sentiment across a lot of vulnerable, oppressed communities on our land. You can argue that have the denotified tribes of India seen their vimukti, seen their decolonization, seen their freedom. These arguments can go on. My point is to give the limitations thereof and the needed task of decolonization ahead. You see, one may argue that this is context specific, for one may argue that other imperial European colonizations, such as the case of India by British, or such as the case of Congo by the Belgians, offer different pathways of superaccumulation, exploitation, and denials. In the Indian instance, all of you know, this was adapted to the particularities of the Indian context, with transcontinental plunder and through the institutions which controlled and legitimized such plunder. India was never a settler colonial state. In a settler colonial state, the narrative is different. So therefore, the representative versions of democracy that we have today and which India in particular, and all others, I think it's a generalized question, we continue to replicate only those incremental developments towards the path of substantive decolonization, the next phase of decolonization, are possible. Needless to say, protagonists, activists that Dr. Patel spoke of, mass movements, are making this happen, are challenging the boundaries of what is called representative democratic terrain and breaking free towards the process of democracy. Is not about institutions alone. It is about the practice of democracy as well. It is about the protagonism of people as well. And therefore enabling self-governance like ideas, sovereignty like ideas to take shape. This, my friends, is the story of most of the democracies, representative democracies, despite the first phase of decolonization. You may argue there was bourgeois or elite takeover of those democracies. The liberation struggles remained incomplete. And until and unless egalitarianism means that we will need to see where race, caste, and identity politics is not separated from class politics, where people have now possibilities to assert sovereignties. Now, there are a lot of limitations there, and I think this is an argument. Samir Amin, of course, went on to say the path to do this would be delinking. And this is not the subject of the talk today, so I'll not get there. But you can read, a lot of literature is available. Now, in this context, let us examine the question of violence, peace, and the linkage to decolonization. And I'll shortly end, Dr. Patel, in the next 5, 7, 10 minutes, if you allow me that.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Now, in much of the current, as I was saying, in much of the current debates or advances of decolonization, or the co-option of the very word called decolonization by academia in the North, by activists in the North, by thinkers in the North, is a mainstream system, which is what I call a sponge slogan. This decolonization today has become a sponge slogan, one which absorbs without producing anything, and therefore unproductive, and a way of total decimation and reduction. For in the world today, we have two realities, and let's talk of both the realities. We have the possibility where the real decolonization, let's take the case of Australia, settler colonialism. Let's take the case of Brazil, or let's take the case of America as I was. What would real decolonization mean? It would mean basically dismantling of settler states. As the New York columnist, and I was reading him, fantastic sort of opinion wrote. His name is Bret Stephens. He once wrote, real atonement would mean all whites, all blacks, immigrants, such as the Indians and the others, Egyptians and the others, the Arabs and the others, were to return to where they came from and leave the land for the natives, what is called popularly in the Western movies caricatured as Red Indians. Correct? And in history, I only have come across, and I am there often, one real geographical attempt to decolonization. That is in the land of Zimbabwe. That is in the erstwhile thing called Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, where during Mugabe's leadership, people who were outside, people who were whites, were all thrown out of the country, often by violent methods, but certainly a project which is being decimated with every single day. Now, so we have one vision of the world there. We have another vision of the world, which is the current vision, which is the current reality, where, and you were talking about Palestine, I will get to that, is this whole question where you have, the possibility of is not hopeless, but you today have the most oppressed people and nations contained in those pathways. It remains a distant dream. Let's take the case of what Yahya Sinwar, who was recently executed by the Israeli forces, a Hamas fighter, you would call him. You can have your own interpretations. Palestinians call him a martyr for Palestine. Here is a poetry he wrote in 2018, not very long ago. And he wrote, and I'll read it for you. When you walk on the beach at the sunset in Gaza, and he's talking about Gaza, and you see all the teenagers on the shores, chatting and wondering what the world looks like across the sea, because they can't get there. It's an open prison. What life looked like beyond the shores. And it is breaking, and it should break everybody. I want to see them free. Yahya Sinwar, 2018. Irrespective of the interpretation of Hamas as a liberation force or contradictory interpretations that float around the world of Hamas as an Islamic force, I, of course, don't subscribe to the latter. You can have your argument. Peace, and therefore I come to this from the context of Palestine now to the question of peace. Peace, therefore, my friends, is quite clear, despite the fact that 1 year and a couple of months later, we do not have ceasefire. We do not even have had a humanitarian pause. We have killings of thousands and tens of thousands of people. So peace is, despite that, peace is not just the absence of violence. It is that. I want to reiterate, it is that. But it is also about justice and equality, a point which was being referred to in your opening remarks, Dr. Patel. It is about justice, it's about equality, it's about equity, it's about harmony in relationships. And I would like to say, taking that case or any other case in human history or contemporary times, to say that it can only be, in my opinion, cannot be a skewed relationship of power. It can only be between equals, or people who have autonomy and make equal worlds possible. The Mayan traditions, the Latin American Mayan tradition, of course, expands the idea of peace to also associate it with welfare and progress, social progress. For how can there be peace in Palestine when both the peoples coexist in oppressive situations, the oppressor and the oppressed? And I don't have to give you facts for that. You can do very well research on that. You can hear it every day on social media and elsewhere. Now, the point is, for there to be peace in a realistic manner, people often argue that people can coexist in harmony. And in a limited manner, we can see a settler colonial state, which is the state of Israel, coexist, even under those terrible conditions of unequal power, with the people in Gaza and Palestine. And this is how the two-state solution of coexistence of Israel and Palestine was posited. A more transformative idea is something else. Now, this is therefore the narrative of peace and decolonization. And this is a big task. Let me go on to argue that peace and democracy, of course, have a deep-set integral linkage. Peace beyond just the absence of violence in a manner I spoke of, a substantive peace, a peace based on equality, a peace based on justice, a peace based on equity, a peace based on equals. So peace beyond just the absence of violence, and democracy beyond just the vote, beyond just political representation in a representative democracy, but democracy as a political substantive participation, as an economic and social justice project. That's the relationship, friends, we are talking of. And in doing so, if we want to advance there, we need to re-examine how the states and the governments around the world, their roles have to be critically re-examined in the manner in which they're using violence as part of militarization and wars on another man's land, on another woman's land. And as a form, internally, they are using to repress popular movements, popular political expressions on their own land. A feminist project of decolonization, therefore, wants to see that birth, that seed to flower. And I think that's the quest of the world. Otherwise, friends, I like to end with a few lines of poetry from Cecil Day Lewis, who wrote, "It is the logic of our times, not subject of immortal verse." So it's not an immortal verse forever, but it is the logic of our times, that they who lived by honest dreams today defend the bad against the worse. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I'm open to questions and debates and discussions. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful inaugural speech on decolonizing, peace building, and democracy, views from the Global South. We deeply appreciate your perspective and vision. I would now like to invite our chair, Vibhuti ma'am, to share her remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, I think everywhere I see among the social activists, there is tremendous demoralization and the sense of hopelessness. Now, in this scenario, what it is that keeps you optimistic about the future of humankind? Because even our friends from Palestine, Doctors Without Border, they say that all educated, articulate, and opinion makers, they are not in Palestine. Palestine, they are basically all of them who have degrees, who have got education, they are in the Western world. So you think that it is from the bottom up struggles of the Western world, the way it happened in anti-war movement, Vietnam War movement. The same thing will change the scenario because those who are in Palestine, they are powerless, they are precariat, and they don't have means to reach out to the global uh, audience. No. So, what would be the root of bringing transformative change? That's the most mind-boggling question all of us in the movement are facing.
I have a few reflections, if I may, although I know
Yeah,
it's not
please.
a more question answer session, but just a few reflections on this. And I think it's an important, the central part of time. And I think on the 25th of this month, and that's just an advertisement, Agrarian South, a journal I did, but the Agrarian South Network, the wider network of working peoples and peasantry and labor in the global South, is organizing Ali Qadri's lecture on the question of global labor movements and the Palestine struggle. But that aside, let me now come to the two aspects. And I think colleagues are invited. Please listen in. It is talking to some of these issues which you raised, Dr. Patel. Now, coming back to your question, where do I see this trajectory happening? I think let me take the case of Palestine. Let me also sort of say that the ICJ case, the International Court of Justice case, let me also sort of give hope in the fact that it is the people's formations in large number of countries in the global south which pushed their member governments to make that case happen. Large part of them from the global south, but not totally not from the north. There are countries from the north, countries like Spain, which are recently joining and things like. But if you look at it, it is essentially the labor movements, the feminist formations, the people's formations, the people whose minds are decolonized in parties, political parties as well. South Africa, for instance, which have pushed, almost really pushed hard, Brazil, for instance, to make what is a very, very strong stricture by the International Court of Justice, which I think would not have been expected otherwise. So let me give hope in the fact that people's movements, the kind of protests, including in the center of the what is called at the heart of the periphery in the US universities, in the European universities, including in several other countries on the streets, including in London, for instance, or the UK, or including in other countries in the global south. Some are notable omissions. We have seen huge wave of human protest against the occupation, the inhumanity, and the ravaging of Palestine, in particular, in this case, Gaza. So I do see a lot of hope there. And that, of course, has changed the global narrative, even if it hasn't stopped the killings. Yeah, I mean, now the BRICS countries coming in. Iran, within the BRICS countries, there is the anti-imperial axis of Russia, of China, of Iran, and the existing, and then some outside supporters like the South Africans and the Brazilians. So one does see, propelled by people's movements, the narrative of Southern power, the assertion of Southern power articulated through the states and beyond the states shifting, not just on account of Palestine, but overall in this last 30 to 40 years of what I call the continued neo-colonial oppressions. Number one. Number two, coming to Israel and coming to Palestine and coming to Gaza and specific to the point you were referring to, I'm not hopeless. Despite the fact that some people may have gone off, Hamas, we must remember, despite its, no movement is pure. And that is why I was saying sometimes we are condemned to defending the bad from the worst. But end of the day, let us also be clear that Hamas is a liberation struggle. History will tell liberation struggles also are get succumb to violent methods. And I think that's a debate we need to have. But if you see, my estimation, our estimation on the ground, even many people's estimations and assessments, political assessments, and current developments in Gaza will tell you, you can kill Hamas leadership, but you will not kill Hamas, because more and more young people who want to resist this inhumanity, who want to resist this operation, will rise up. It may not be Hamas, it may be something else, but this is not going to end. And therefore, it gives hope, not about one organization, but it gives hope to the future of peace, democracy, and decolonization in a more substantive manner. And then let me come to the question which you're talking of, the role of the global north. Now, the states of the global north, in most instances, follow an imperialist path. You have had US elections more recently. Whether X had come or whether Y had come, in this instance, President Trump now, I don't see a big departure on the way US examines its global footprint and policies of what it is now, what is called the happy third space, where not directly engaging in conflicts, but getting others to engage in conflicts and create killings and continued militarization, arms supplies. It's a capitalist enterprise. So I don't see much hope in the control of elite states of the center. If I were to use Samir Amin's typology of the center and the periphery, there are lots of challenges and dynamics there. I'm not getting to that for today, but I don't see much. But I do see much hope in the advance of the project of democratization within the belly of the beast, if I may call it. And this is not just people's unorganized protests. This is also, in certain nations, a push to take over towards more social sort of formations. Spain is a case to point. But there are so many others. I would tend to see whether there's a whole challenge of a new wave of right wing in Latin America, as in the case of Argentina, who dismissed their foreign minister because the foreign minister was supporting something which they would not, in the case of BRICS, for instance. So I think there is this whole challenge. And I do see the advance of project of democratizations and the people's formations within the northern nations also challenging the very ethos of a continuity of a neo-colonial and a continued colonial enterprise. So, yes, but at this moment, fulcrums need to change. At this moment, autonomous southern projects, as I said in my remarks, are needed, whether they are articulated through BRICS, whether they are articulated through a South Labour Commission, as in one comes out, whether they are articulated through a peace-building commission, which President Lula of Brazil has proposed to the UN. The institutional articulations may vary, but that's what's needed to bring a defining change in what I earlier called the next phase of decolonization and the substantive phase of decolonization. So that's how I'd like to put it, Dr. Patel. But thank you for your very interesting sort of,
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you very much. Convincingly put forward the case. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I would like to open the floor for the Q&A session. Participants can either raise their hand or type their question in the Q&A box or the chat box. So we have a question in the chat box. Should I read it?
Or let her unmute and speak.
Shabnam ji, if you can please unmute and ask the question yourself.
If she can't unmute, then you
can. Let me say, I can read it. So she's
Yeah.
asking, Jewish temples are older than Islam itself. So how did Jerusalem become Islamic? Or how have an Islamic upper hand in the Islamic laws? Shabnam ji is asking a question which is in the deep terrain of history. She's talking of not just centuries, but probably even more than 800, 900,000 years. Let me put it this way. I mean, there is this debate that originally the entire area is Jewish. So we have to sort of there are two aspects to it. The historical veracity of it, I don't know, because in the long durée of civilizational histories, ours is a classic case. You have a very long durée of history. So the terrain of where dead people don't talk, where there's vast terrains of continuous history, the truth is a problem. What is the ultimate truth is a problem. And therefore, this argument, Shabnam, of what is called mutual harmonious coexistence. Because is this true or is that true? There are also lots of other scholars which go even beyond the existence of Islamic temples, Jewish temples that you're talking of, and say there is a deep history there which has been forgotten, because end of the day, the power is the one which interprets history. It's the power which interprets history. Interpretation of history is a political project anywhere in the world. The point is, how is history interpreted for what ends? If those ends are divisive, majoritarian, hegemonic, and oppressive, it's not worth that reinvention of history. The point I would like to take in this instance, I'm aware of these debates. I'm aware of longer histories. I'm aware of some anecdotal evidence either way which goes. But having said it without sounding defensive, the position of my argument is not about sending back the Jewish people or the recent hordes of Jewish people to where they came from. As the same way, the point is not about sending the blacks, the whites, and the immigrants to the countries they came from. That is one extreme end of what's called decolonization. Is it doable? But more importantly, is it desirable at this point in human history? So what must accrue thereof is the point of what's called harmonious coexistence as equals, with dignity and with respect, with sovereignty and with autonomy. The entire global south, but more importantly, I would say a slight correction to the topic here in the narrative, the South global articulation, because South is not just limited to some geography. It is the South global articulation, a feminist articulation, is about futures together in respect to the planet and in respect to humanity and coexistence. So in the instance of this question that you're talking to, what is the path forward? The path forward is not unimaginable. The path forward is not a hegemonic path of one against the other. The path forward is of dignified, mutual, respectable coexistence. That may not happen to the two-state solutions, because precisely it's for this reason that the two-state solution hasn't come about, because nobody wants it. Apart from the lip service, nobody wants it, because oppressive hegemonic conditions are being militarized and seen as an enterprise, which is what I call the happy third. A big role of this is the backhand of US. And we can debate it, but I think this is an important question. But the panelists, my question is that, in your experience, what are the main barriers to achieve inclusivity in peace processes, especially in protracted conflicts? I think some of these answers Dr. Patel will talk about in the subsequent session, but I think I have given my opinion to these. These fundamental things need demilitarization. These fundamental aspects need stopping of imperial powers or neocolonial powers, call them whatever, the center, call them the hegemonic powers, to be curtailed, and through what, call it de-dollarization, call it containment, call it significant opposition creation, to ensure that weaponization and militarization of the planet is stopped. Number two, to reform the United Nations system. If you will notice, all of the resolutions of the UN General Assembly on the question of Palestine was stymied by the Security Council and by one or two members of the Security Council. They could not happen. They could not be implemented on the ground, to the extent that the simple organizations such as the United Nations RWA, the Refugee Welfare Agency, operating in Palestine, has been totally delegitimized. To the extent that the UN Secretary General has been called a persona non grata. What more attack on the UN by Israel? And not everybody keeping quiet, including on the resolution which countered it, several members abstained or several members opposed it. So I think this whole question needs a reform of the global system, the global value system that I talked of. It needs reform of the global value chains that I spoke about, the substantivity of a decolonization. It needs to start from decolonization of the mind. And there, the role of academic institutions, there, the role of such kind of courses is important to play. Otherwise, you will have the idea of decolonization and democratization limited to what I call the sponge system, sands of substance, and only reduced to what is called cultural interpretations, as in our land, the return of artifacts, the renaming of streets, the change of certain laws, which is important, but sands of the substance of egalitarianism. So I think there are lots of challenges we see, and therefore those challenges need to be addressed on the path. In terms of practical stories, we have enough basis on my experience. You're talking, I think your question tacitly talks more about peace building, what is called negotiation, conflict resolution approaches. These may work in very localized situations, but given the kind of expanse I'm speaking of, these have important and need to happen, but these are not the only ways in which protracted peace, I'm talking now of protracted crisis, but protracted peace can sustain or can happen. But I'm sure Dr. Patel will add some opinions from what she had earlier talked of protracted crisis situations.
We have sessions on that. Yeah.
So we have left with one question by Abhishek Ji. So you talked about the importance of decolonization, but also mentioned about neocolonization. Can you please elaborate how it is existing in today's time despite of so right and one important aspect of peace building policy?
I was muted. Sorry, on your question, let me just put it, neocolonization and continued sort of neocolonialism, it operates in various ways. It operates through the political social institutions, the political economy system that I spoke of, through the unequal, exchange processes which global trade rules imply. It operates through the monetary question that I spoke of. So it continues to operate through various institutional channels. It also continues to operate through the imagery of what kind of world. That's where the mind question comes in. On the political leaderships, on the what is called the political projects, the state projects, of what kind of, let me give an example of what kind of cities we need to create. A large number of, government constructs in the global south continue to create cities which are nothing but a replication of cities and urbanization that happened in the global north. But remember, that urbanization was aided and abetted by the colonial accumulation and plunder that happened. The city of Brussels or the city of London would not have been the same city of London or the same city of Brussels if the Belgians hadn't colonized Congo, cut off hands of people, stolen all the wealth, or the same goes for the city of London. In the colonial sort of way, the British sun never sets in the colonies that they have. So that accumulation led to a phase of, industrial accumulation, industrialization itself, that phase of industrialization, export of populations to settler colonization, reduction of peasantry into a different narrative where you have 2 or 3 or 4% of people in many of these countries, Germany and UK and so on and so forth, which are in peasantry. The rest are in sort of formal labor force. So that economic transition that happened there. Now that's the kind of thing that we want to create here, minus of those conditions. And that's the kind of imagery of most of our urbanization projects. So the question of what imagery is to follow, an autonomous project of the South means decolonizing the mind, decolonizing those institutions, decolonizing the question of political economy, and certainly an imagery of social progress, harmony, and development we want to see. The idea of the indigenous people in Ecuador and Bolivia, the idea of what is called buen vivre, the idea of a good life, the idea of a life well lived, is certainly not a capitalist idea. It's certainly not a hegemonic idea. It's an idea of harmony, coexistence, and Gandhi spoke to it. Mahatma Gandhi spoke to it a lot. In what kind of consumptions we have. We know, and coming from the ecology end, we know the planet has finite resources. We know there's unequal distribution. We know which creates the climate footprint. We need to correct all that. And those are the kind of things which will challenge in answering your questions, which will enable people's assertions and people's sovereignties and a different respect for nature and culture in a harmonious way. But these are not top-down projects. As I said, these are not projects which will be implemented from somewhere. These are projects of popular consciousness. So therefore, this whole idea of developing, working to develop, which movements do, which activists do, which social formations do, is developing a progressive social consciousness. Because in the end, that is what the leader is. If you have a popular social consciousness, which is majoritarian, which is oppressive, you will only see oppression in the future, whether legitimized to the state or whether outside of the state. So that's how I would like to approach this question to Abhishek.
Thank you, sir, for your inspiring and engaging talk with us. It's always a pleasure learning from you. We look forward to having you at our future IMPRI events as well. Moving on with our next session for today, I would like to invite Ms. Rita Manchanda ji, Research Director, South Asia Forum for Human Rights, for her session on redefining agency and resilience, narrativizing women, war, and peace in South Asia. We welcome you, ma'am. Over to you.
Ma'am, you'll have to adjust your screen. We are not able to see your face.
I'm not sure how. Can you see me now?
Yeah, half of you can see.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, hearing is clear. Yeah, only thing your view is.
Well, let's see. I mean, perhaps you can make some adjustments because at the moment I'm still in one of the little boxes.
Okay.
I mean, I've tried to tilt it, I've tried to make it go up, but there isn't much I can do over there.
Okay.
It's all right, ma'am. We can continue. Do you have some slides to share, or would you like to
No,
go
I
without
don't. But
slides?
can you? Do you want me to try and see if I can do something with the view?
Yeah. Now at least 3/4 of your view we are getting.
Just tilt it towards yourself. Yeah, that is fine. That is fine. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Is that better?
Yeah,
Fine.
perfect.
Now it's fine. Yeah.
Fine.
Good.
All right. So would you like me to begin?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, please
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to thank the organizers for enabling me to have this conversation with you on this topic of redefining agency and resilience, narrativizing women, war, and peace in South Asia. Now, in the narrative of women, war, and peace, in fact, in the war narrative, the archetypal story is that of the female rescue narrative. Whether you look at Western classical epics, Homer's Iliad, whether you look at, in fact, the Indian epics, the Ramayana, the essential turn of war is triggered by, in fact, the whole issue of rescuing the woman. And it is also this particular narrative on which the just war theory is imprinted. And we know how the just war theory was used most recently in the case of Afghanistan to justify the international intervention there. Now, this core narrative configures women as passive, as helpless, in fact, totally depoliticized. And it's this disempowering narrative that today we are going to unpack and, in fact, challenge and really turn upside down. When we talk about restoring, or rather visibilizing, agency, resilience, and I would add here even resistance to the peace work of women. And we are talking about non-combatant women here. Now, and also I want to emphasize that I'm not really talking, when we talk about peace building, I am looking at conflict as a continuum, the prevention of conflict, conflict, and post-conflict, or what is often called transition. And the coexistence of the vulnerability, the material reality of the vulnerability of women, particularly in conflict situations, but also the coexistence of what one would describe as agency. Now, most of us think of 1325, the year 2000, the adoption of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda as in fact heralding this visibilization of local women's agency. I want to emphasize that in the Global South, and particularly in South Asia, this narrative, this visibilization is something that has been on the cards or has been on the research agenda, on the advocacy agenda, though not necessarily on the policy agenda, since in fact the 1980s, particularly 1990s, and of course in the first decade of the millennium. And the framework, the conceptual framework in which much of this narrative was developed was the dialectical relationship between victimhood and agency. As I mentioned, there is the material reality of women's vulnerability, but there is also alongside the whole issue of the possibility, the scope for agency. Some have described it as ambivalent empowerment, like Dharani Rajasingham. Others have talked about the structural constraints and enabling spaces of women. But it is, in fact, this dialectical relationship and the importance of not conflating victimhood with, or rather not conflating vulnerability with victimhood. Vulnerability can coexist with agency. And also the emphasis that there is no linear framework. Vulnerability, agency can all, in fact, in a sense, either march together, either displace one or the other in a very non-linear, very fluid identity kind of way. Now here, before I plunge into structurally organizing through the lens of resilience and agency, narrativization of women, war, and peace, I want to just clarify certain things. One is the context in which we are today looking at, or we are today emphasizing, and the importance of emphasizing the resilience and agency. Today, if you look at, in fact, the international discourse, it's almost become a paradigmatic solution of the women, war, and peace agenda, that local women's agency, local women's resilience in public policy, in feminist scholarship, but particularly, as I emphasize, in public policy, in international security discourses, the emphasis on self-reliance, on women's agency, on women's resilience as, in fact, the solution for crises, the solution for conflict. And so let's, break up the why is this so? What is the context which has made this possible? One, and there are 5 elements in this which I would just like to highlight, or rather flag. One is the whole expansion of the understanding of security. That is the beginning, the bringing in of the human security discourse, the shift away from exclusively focusing on military security to a much more comprehensive definition, and also the shift away from state-centric national security to looking at people-centric human security. And then there is, sorry, one moment. Okay, then there is the whole issue of feminist scholarship. which has visibilized local women's agency and legitimized that agency as political agency. And as I mentioned to you earlier, this is before, in fact, the advent of the women, peace, and security discourse. Contributing to this particularly was the huge advocacy and networking at the transnational level, at the regional level, and at the national level of women's collectives. This was partly sort of catalyzed by the Beijing process. Also, this is, of course, the moment when you have the post-Yugoslavia conflict, and a great deal of feminist scholarship and advocacy focused on that, on the visibilizing of agency there. And the Beijing process did something in India in particular. In India, it introduced to us the Northeast as a conflict area, but also as an area of where local women's agency was visible. So this is all happening in the 1990s. And civil society mobilization also drove the 1325 discourse, the Women, Peace, and Security discourse, which was adopted, as I said, in 2000 by the Security Council, and it embedded the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in the international system and also introduced hegemonic globalized norms. So then you have also another element, which is the failure or the recognition of the failure of peace agreements, that they were unsustainable, that these top-down, elite-driven, neoliberal peace agreements were just not working. And so consequently, the need to look somewhere else in terms of sustainable peace building. And finally, there is the congruence of the resilience as for peace building approach with, in fact, the 1325 approach or the programmatic agenda of the Women, Peace, and Security discourse, which is that it needs to be people-centric, or in this case, women-centric, that it needs to be bottom-up, that it needs to be gender-sensitive, that it draws upon the local agency of women. Now, here, of course, this congruence is not unproblematic. And the reason I say that is because what is it doing? It is disproportionately shifting the responsibility for peace building on women's collectives, on the community, without necessarily providing them the material means to actually sustain this, particularly over time. And then even more, in a sense, sinister, is the fact that you are also displacing responsibility from state actors. And these are, of course, national as well as external state actors. And you are shifting or overwhelmingly shifting responsibility to individuals, to communities for peace building, and not, in fact, tackling issues of structural inequality, of the structural constraints. So it is, in fact, there is a very distinct discomfort about that there's nothing innocent about this bottom-up approach of, in fact, visibilizing and building on the capacity of local women's resilience and agency. But nonetheless, it still is shifting away from this elite-driven, top-down, exclusionary peace processes, which just didn't work. Let me here also redefine, or rather, let me focus some attention on why is it that we're calling it redefining agency and resilience? Why didn't we just say agency and resilience? Why are we redefining? What new elements have actually come in? And for those of you who are interested in exploring this, I would suggest there is, in fact, a journal called the International Journal of International Relations and Development, the 2022 issue. There's a special issue of 6 to 8 articles specifically focused on unpacking the multidimensional aspects of rethinking resilience. Now, resilience is something, a concept that has been around for a hell of a long time. We've talked about resilience and agency, more about agency than resilience, but certainly it's been around. So what new element has suddenly now come into this that we are refocusing on it? And particularly are the international public policy experts who are really reframing policy, who are shaping policy, are they thinking of something else in rethinking resilience and agency, or are we thinking along the same lines? Well, what they're thinking of, I don't, as I said, that's for another perhaps space or forum, but let me at least discuss with you what I think or how I would really define based on the narratives, based on, in fact, the ground level activism of women, of local women. And one is, of course, how does one define resilience? Now, resilience, in a sense, is it self-reliance? Is it to do with the capacity to cope, to adapt to disaster, to devastation, to domination? Is it also resistance? Is there a form of resistance that is associated with resilience? Does it include agency? Is there a difference? Now, here, because they all seem, in a sense, quite overlapping, I would say that it's very important to look at them within a non-linear frame and to recognize overlapping. Some would say resilience itself is a form of resistance, that you can be able to survive, to cope with devastation when all is burning, that you can actually find the capacity to act, to take control of your life again, to not to resist being totally overwhelmed and dominated. That itself is resistance. So in a sense, there is a lot of overlapping. I would say that if I had to distinguish, and this is a very more analytical than real distinction between agency and resilience, I would say agency involves an element of intent, that is, of political consciousness, whereas resilience can certainly exist without any sense of that you are actually resisting or that you are coping or adapting. You're just surviving. And so bringing in that element of intent, of consciousness, perhaps one can argue that in fact is a demonstration of greater agency. But as I said, these are all blurred lines, they all overlap. And it's not a confusion that only I have or that I am articulating. The very fact that even this journal hybridize, they call it agential, they call it agential self-reliance. So in a sense, they're recognizing the overlap. Now, I recognize that, these abstractions sound very obtruse. So let me tether them in some kind of an example. And here I want to draw your attention to Kashmir. This is a moment before 2019, militarized occupation, as some authors have described it. And here I'm drawing upon a very, very fine writer, Niharika Pandit, whose new work is just about to come out, and in which she talks about the everyday politics of living. And in fact, she talks about resilience and agency. And the example she gives of resilience, I find really very, very helpful to clarify. And this is counter mappings, counter archives, the refusal to forget. Now, particularly counter mapping. What is counter mapping? Young girls who are walking to school or college in an environment that is saturated by soldiers, checkposts, military bunkers, multiple explosions at all times, crackdowns, curfew. How do these young girls take control of their lives to walk to school and to be able to resist or cope with the leering or looks or lascivious looks of soldiers or comments of soldiers and so forth? What they do is they work out maps of alternate routes in their mind to be able to avoid the soldiers. They work out mind maps of safe houses where if there is a crackdown, if there is a curfew announcement or an explosion takes place, which is the safe house that they can rush to as they go on their way to tuition or they return from tuition in the evening. So these are all as very, very simple ways of coping, very simple ways of adapting, but these are ways of taking some capacity, developing capacity to take some control of their life. Another is, as I mentioned, the refusal to forget. There is this wonderful phrase of the Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali, which really sums it up, which is, "My memory gets in the way of your history." And this is it, storytelling, documenting, refusal to forget. Another type of narrative from the official narrative. And then there is, of course, documentation, memorialization. Now, this we will see much more in, I want to talk about much more in agency later, but refusal. Refusal can be of many kinds. You know, in 1984, much, much before any of you were born, the Sikh women, and this was soon after the anti-Sikh violence in which I think 3,000 people were killed in Delhi. I mean, in Delhi itself, there was a huge carnage. These Sikh women, the widows, decided they would not end mourning. And the performance of this unending mourning was they wouldn't tie their hair, they wouldn't bathe, they would publicly lament and so forth. The politics of mourning we will explore later. But this is the refusal to forget, the refusal to end mourning and therefore effect closure, saying no closure till justice, no closure till accountability. Now, these are all, as I mentioned to you, here you see resilience, here you see agency, and you see a form of resistance. Now, I want to now look in a much more structured way about using the lens of resilience and agency to structurally organize the narrativization of women, war, and peace in South Asia. South Asia has had a huge, rich history of the in fact, I would say, motherhood politics. Motherhood politics has been central to, in fact, the conflicts. Now, whether one talks about the ethnic conflict in Sri Lanka, or in fact, the conflict, I mean, today Sri Lanka has a president, Anura Dissanayake, who is a member of a radical Marxist party, which in the 1980s was considered a terrorist outfit, and there was war against the JVP, which is that party, and you had huge number of missing as well as extrajudicial killings. It was this which triggered or which prompted the emergence of one of the first known Mothers' Front in Sri Lanka, in South Asia, in Sri Lanka. In fact, the inspiration, it is said, of this politics of mourning of the mothers front actually dates to the protests of the mothers in Argentina and El Salvador, the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo in Argentina. And but you had and there is this wonderful article by Malati Dalvas written in 1998 on that Mothers Front. And this is the Tamil Mothers Front. This is the Mothers Front of the North. There is another article which deals with the Mothers Front in the south of Sri Lanka. Now, here, of course, we have a lot of motherhood politics in the Northeast. This is saturated with mothers' fronts, but I want to co-join it with the politics of mourning. The politics of motherhood takes many forms. It takes the forms of the politics of mourning and memorialization, remembrance as a way of asserting accountability, demanding justice. But there is also forms of motherhood politics, which is to end the violence, motherhood politics, to negotiate peace, to sustain ceasefire. So there are all kinds and all levels of motherhood politics. But I want to look at the politics of mourning first. And the politics of mourning involves the shifting from private space of what is the normal tradition of mourning and shifting it into public space, and thereby politicizing it and performing collective mourning. And this in India at least, it is best demonstrated through the Association of the Parents of the Disappeared. In 1991, Parveena Ahangar lost her son, Javed Ahangar. I think he was 17 or 14 years old. He went missing. And in her devastation, her grief, her trauma, she met other women who too were suffering, and a solidarity developed, a network developed, which through the assistance of Parvez Imroz emerged as a lawyer called Parvez Imroz emerged as the Association of the Parents of the Disappeared. Except after 2019, it ended, or at least the public demonstrations have ended. But every one day in a month, the women would come, and these are poor women. These are women who would come from the corners of Kashmir. They would come to Pratap Bagh, which is just in front of the press colony, and they would sit there in silent vigil, in lamentation of loss, holding up the photographs. Their children would be there, husbands, brothers, sisters would be there holding up the placard of "Give us back our son, where is our son, where is our husband," and so forth, demanding of the state as protector, a state though which has turned also predator, but demanding of the protector state, let us as mothers do our duty, and let us look after our children. So give us back our children. So the reason I'm emphasizing this is very much within the framework of what is acceptable gender behavior, gender appropriate behavior. These are mothers saying, let us do our motherly duty. Give us back our children. So it's socially sanctioned, but of course it is also resistance. It's resistance because you're demanding accountability. You are also, by this process of remembrance, and they have also memorialized it in calendars, in photographs and postcards, by this act of remembrance, of public remembrance, of ritualistic public remembrance, what they're saying is they're validating the existence of their lost husbands, sons, and so forth, because there is no body, there is no evidence. How else will they be able to establish that they ever existed and that they were ever taken away? So in a sense, it's a validation of their existence, and it's also a legitimation of their disappearance, of saying, of a refusal to accept the state's silencing, the state's erasure, and the state's dismembering of their bodies. So it's a very politicized, very powerful strategy, but it's also a strategy, as I said, rooted in motherhood and in very traditional gendered norms. There is no transgression involved in this. So how does the state oppose it? It cannot oppose it. Then I want to just and you know this type of politics of mourning exists all across. I mean, in Sri Lanka, the women did not use, they didn't use a public park and the ritual of one day public remembrance and so forth. What they did was they would go to the temples and they would do what is called ritualistic cursing. These are all weapons of the weak. They would go do ritualistic cursing the president for having taken away their sons, for missing, for extrajudicial killings, and so forth, and when Premadasa was killed in an LTT attack, these women actually said it was because of us. Well, that's a different narrative altogether. But this kind of politics of mourning, the Sikh women refusing to end their mourning, this kind of ritualistic mourning, the mourning that, in fact, the Mera Paibis do, I will come to that. It's across the board, and it's one of the most powerful strategies. The other, as I mentioned, is the use of motherhood politics to stop the violence. And here I want to draw your attention to the Naga Mothers Association in Nagaland. Nagaland is in fact one of our oldest conflicts, probably self-determination conflicts. They are in peace agreement right now at the ceasefire and peace process. There is still no politically conclusive peace agreement yet. But in the 1990s, there was huge interfactional violence. The Naga groups were at war with each other, and every morning the markets would open and you would find dead bodies lying on the street. Nobody would dare to claim them. The mothers then decided, and this was also a form of the politics of mourning, to take the bodies and to give them a dignified funeral as pertained to their tribe with the tribal shawl and so forth. But more importantly, they also launched a peace campaign called Stop the Bloodshed. And here they would send out peace teams of the tribal, it would be women from the tribal groups, women from the tribe going to appeal to the boys of the tribe to end the violence. They also used what is called kitchen politics to try and get the local leaders to come to their kitchen, would feed them, like mothers, would feed them, and would also then talk to the boys and say, for whom are you fighting, if not for us? And if you attack the security forces here, they will attack the village and destroy everything. So in a sense, it was to minimize the violence. And finally, they also use something called shuttle diplomacy. These women, and earlier they just had a tokenistic presence. They would always have to be there in their in the traditional dress, but they never had voice. What we saw over these years is the Naga women acquiring voice, the Naga women becoming irreplaceable. I mean, the phrase you would hear is, where are the Naga women? If we are doing anything, any meeting, any process, any civil society meeting, they would have to be there. And so shuttle diplomacy, in the sense they reached out. the Naga peace process is a very fractured peace process. At the moment, there is one dominant group, and they are the dominant players. They are in agreement, but there are also other groups that also have small armed groups, at one point, not so small armed groups. And the women would actually make an effort to try and make the peace process inclusive. I have known these women twice, on 3 occasions, go into Myanmar, go through the jungles, up the river, and cycle to, in fact, the headquarters of one of the major leaders of the Naga National Group, Armed Naga National Group, and appeal to him to join the ceasefire. They have done this to make sure that the peace process can be sustainable. Nagaland has a history of failed peace processes because they are not inclusive. And at the moment also, the peace process is in trouble because of this whole issue of who represents the Nagas. But let me just move quickly. These are of course, once the ceasefire, and that was in 1997, and you had also then the framework peace agreement with Modi coming into power in 2015, I think. But you find the Naga women have played a major role in also sustaining the peace ceasefire. That is, monitoring the ceasefire informally. They were supposed to be formally included, but civil society in the end was not formally included. Then there is the involvement of the women as, again, in terms of a body politics, forming a human blockade, interceding between 2 warring groups. I mean, there was the Assam Rifles and an encampment of the armed Naga workers. And these women just interceded in between. I think it was for a week. They didn't move. I mean, there was a relay, but they did these kind of things to ensure, using, in fact, body politics, using themselves as a human blockade to prevent clashes. Then in Manipur, I would like to now draw attention to, in fact, the Mera Paibis. The Mera Paibis, of course, have enjoyed a great, or rather, have become quite notorious, but I don't want to go there. We can certainly go there during the question hour. Right now, I want to talk about the opposition, the resistance of the Naga, of the Manipuri mothers, that is the Mera Paibis, against the militarization in Manipur, and in particular against the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, that is the symbol of militarized oppression all across the Northeast and in Kashmir. This is partly because of Article 5 in this, the Clause 5, which talks about shoot at sight, shoot on suspicion. And it is, in fact, the root of the culture of impunity, which has actually corroded the law and order cultures in all these states. The Mera Paibis began, like the Naga mothers, really patrolling against drug peddlers and so forth. Eventually, they transformed themselves into into these torch-bearing women who would set out at night and sound the alarm when there was going to be a crackdown, and the army raids would come to take away the boys. They too would, in fact, serve as human shields, preventing, in fact, the boys from being taken away, or once they were taken away, to try and get them back. They would also maintain these silent vigils. They would also, and the interesting aspect of it is, it was a performance. It was a ritual performance. They would be massed on a platform, and they would all be wearing the ritual coloring. They would wear a sort of a beige and pink panak and blouse. And it was seen, I mean, they actually themselves saw themselves, they saw themselves as performing a sacred ritual. I mean, it's not that, they would just, it's not that they would just run from the kitchen to sit on this. No, it was, in fact, a ritual enactment of a performance of protest. They would march in rallies, and there is this wonderful film by a Manipuri filmmaker on AFSPA 1958. Please do see it. You see these women. They were beaten up, they were lathi charged. The Indian security forces had very little patience with them. And but these were their protests, and amidst, of course, the Mera Paibis. I'm not going into who they were, these were mothers. And all women in Manipur eventually join subgroups of Mera Paibis, but these are essentially mothers. Young women are not part of this process, except I found in Baluchistan, but let me first focus on the Mera Paibis. All of you may, or many of you may have heard of Irom Sharmila. For 16 years, she went on a fast, abjuring water, abjuring food, adopting, in fact, the body. She used a strategy of bodily renunciation to assert, to speak truth to power, and that was truth to power against the AFSPA. Her fast was triggered by an incident of violence that took place in 2000, and she, for 16 long years, she was force-fed. She gave up her fast in 2016, I think. Yes, in 2016. And that was largely because the Indian state, frankly, was completely indifferent to her. The Manipur state was quite sympathetic, but not the Indian state. I'm not going into, I will come back to this, but the more dramatic form of the Mera Paibis body politics was the nude protest. And this was in 2004. 12 Mera Paibis took stripped, and they had before this called the media. So this was going to be a public demonstration. It was a public protest, the public nude protest, in which they went to the Kangla Fort. The Kangla Fort has a lot of significance because it was the seat of the Manipur kingdom. It was taken over by the Assam Rifles, and these women, the trigger was the killing, the abduction, the rape, the killing, and the bodily mutilation of Manorma Devi. And it was in protest at this kind of violence, and violence with impunity, because there would not be any justice, violence with impunity, that these women decided to take this last resort of nude protest. And they held aloft the banners saying, "Indian Army, come rape us." It's interesting that there is, in none of the banners, is there any mention of we are Manorma's mothers, which is an explanation they gave later on. But here it says, "Indian Army, come rape us." So in a sense, it's a very sexualized imagery of the Mera Paibis, who otherwise present a very asexual image. And I am emphasizing this because this nude protest was something that was seen as a gender transgression. I have emphasized that a lot of this agency, a lot of this resilience, a lot of this resistance is very much attuned to the socio-cultural background of the community. Even the Naga mothers I mean, they are drawing upon a tradition of having been peacemakers, like Pukrelia. I mean, a Naga woman would intercede between two warring groups and drop her fenek or a sarong and stop the conflict. So it draws upon these old traditions of gender-appropriate, socially sanctioned behavior. But this behavior was not really gender-appropriate behavior. And there's a wonderful article by Panchali Ray. I would urge you to look at it. There's also my own work on this, in which Panchali calls it a slippage, a momentary slippage, which is immediately bridged over, and there is a pushback, and the subjugated position of the mothers as asexual is once again restored. Now, there is a similar movement and a much more powerful form of resistance by the Naga mothers. See, the Naga mothers, and one of the reasons I have always been fascinated by the Naga mothers is because I see in their journey the transformation of women in the informal space of politics towards the asserting their presence in the formal sphere of politics. And this is that in the informal sphere, they had acquired legitimacy as stakeholders in the peace process. There was absolutely no possibility of any event, whether called by the Naga armed groups or whether civil society, without involving the women. Even the Forum for Naga Reconciliation, meant to bring together the split groups, and to stop the violence, had women's presence. They were very much integral part of all these processes. So it is not unexpected that, in fact, you would see, and you see over this long period, this long journey, because this is an generational journey, new kinds of women coming into the movement. You've also got 5 decades of Naga integration into the Indian Union, state formation, integration into the national grid of both the economy and education. So you've got a lot of social churning happening, which is affecting not only gender power transformation, but also tribal elite structures. But as far as the women were concerned, new kinds of women, professional women, were entering into the Naga Mothers Forum. And these women were demanding they were demanding a chance to affect policy. They were demanding voice. They were demanding representation. And these women said, we want to stand for elections. There is reservations at the local assembly, at the local elections. Fine. At the rural level, we have a different system of village councils. Okay. But what about the urban councils? We can contest that. They went to court, there was resistance. Finally, the court ruled in their favor and elections were to be held. There was a huge backlash. Dimapur burned. Dimapur is the commercial capital, was set on fire. These women had to escape. They hid for months. I mean, there was bounty on their head. It was said that they were undermining Naga community values and so forth. In fact, they even said that Article 371 was being undermined by them because of what they were trying to do. So you could see, but what is the amazing thing is, over the last 10 years, this happened in 2017, there's been a pushback, a slow pushback. The women have come back. The women are re-strategizing. That story is not finished. That story may be finished in Manipur, and it's taken a very different turn. It's important to recognize that women in conflicts which are identity-based conflicts are not seeking autonomy outside those identity ethnic processes. They are very much a part of it. They're very much embedded in it. But yes, they are seeking elbow room. They are trying to assert agency, some level of agency. And, I'm often asked, what about the Mirapaibis? The Mirapaibis were stalwarts in opposing the Indian state. They had never, ever opposed, they had never criticized their own ethnic patriarchy. Other aspects we can discuss later. How am I doing for time? Do I have 5 minutes?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yes, yes.
Okay. I want to just talk about something, Balochistan. Many of you have heard of Balochistan only because you read about the Baloch Liberation Army, the terrorist attack, the attacks on the Chinese, the development along the Gwadar port, in which the Chinese are involved, and the targeting of that in Balochistan. Balochistan is a very rich province, very, very underdeveloped. In fact, it is the oldest self-determination struggle probably in South Asia. And there have been many, in fact, I think there have been three moments of mobilization, of armed mobilization, and we are seeing the latest. But here you're also seeing, hello?
Yes.
Have you lost me, or am I still there?
No, you're very much there. We can hear you.
Okay. I think I've lost. Anyway, I'll fix that. So let me just finish, and then I'll try and get back. So what is it? In 2018, I think 24 women, and Balochistan is a very conservative, very high, extremely patriarchal society. 200 women, and in a very, very militarized context, march from Quetta to Karachi, 700, I think, miles, and to protest against extrajudicial killings and disappearances. Now, more recently, Balochistan women have been in the news because Dr. Maharang Baloch, she's only 31 years old. She's no mother. She may be a mother, but she's not configured herself as part of motherhood politics. Sadi, there is this other young woman who is even younger. She's a student. These are women who today are leading the mass protest in Balochistan. Thousands and thousands come for their mass meetings in which they protest against extrajudicial killings and disappearances and the underdevelopment and exploitation of the resources of Balochistan. So there is, I've not, and I hope that maybe somebody does the research to help us understand what kind of shift is taking place. These are young women. But these are, of course, there are many young women who have been part of agency politics. The fact that we focus on motherhood politics doesn't mean that other women are also, local women's agencies confined to them. And I will close here, I want to draw your attention to 2016 and the publication of a book called Do You Remember Kunan Pushpara? And this was brought out by a cohort of women, young women in their 20s, mostly in their 20s, lawyers, activists, journalists, who came together to memorialize an event that was the war atrocity story in Kashmir. 1991, the twin villages of Kunan Pushpara, there was a crackdown. In that crackdown, and this was in February, so extreme winter, in that crackdown, it is said that, men are separated and the women are there, and then the soldiers enter, that there were mass rapes. Now, there was a lot of contestation of that. What the truth was, that remains, in fact, something contested. It became the story on which the information war was waged between the Indian forces, between the defense establishment and the opposition. These women decided to reopen the case. They, in fact, they reopened the case in the courts to get justice. Now, these were the women by now were largely grandmothers, and there are a lot of stories, regularly stories come out that, there have been no marriages that have taken place. These women have been stigmatized. Children from this village are always teased and so forth. Whatever the truth of that may be needs to be examined. But more important, these girls decided, and they needed 50 signatures to be able to file, to reopen the case. They managed to get their mothers also to support. Some got their mothers to support them, and they went to court. The court eventually did accept, but nothing much has happened on that front. However, they did bring out, do you remember Kunan Pushpara? And this is a form of memorialization, a very, very important strategy of agency to commemorate refusal to forget, and the determination to validate what did happen in their way, and to prevent the erasure, to prevent closure, by saying, do you remember? And it is young Kashmiri women who are asking this question and trying to present a narrative. So I think I will stop here and perhaps take a few questions if there are any. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
Thank you, ma'am,
thank
for an enlightening session on redefining agency and resilience, narrativizing women, war, and peace in South Asia. Your insights were truly inspiring and thought-provoking. Now, I would like to invite our chair, Vibhuti ma'am, to share her remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. So I think my very important presentation that you made, but what we see in South Asia is that all these women were within the patriarchal setup with, I think, silent support of their men. But Somalia, that way stands out, in terms of women rebuilding, because it's not only in the resistance, but also in the mainstream politics. How did the transition happen? And how come the patriarchs in Somalia, they did not propose very violent resistance to women coming center stage?
Vibhuti, thank you so much for this question. And I'm going to shift away from India to look at Nepal and to look at Afghanistan. When you talk about the inclusion of women in mainstream politics, partly this is through peace agreements, negotiated peace agreements. Now, the conflicts that I spoke about largely in India or even in Sri Lanka, there are no real political peace agreements yet. But in Nepal and in Sri Lanka and in Afghanistan, you did have peace agreements. And there you did have 30% reservations for women to enter mainstream politics. Now, I'm not too sure about Somalia. I know in the Sudan and in other spaces where women have come in, the question that needs to be asked is which women come in? Are they, as in Afghanistan, the proxies of warlords? Are they elite women? Who are these women? Nepal was a slightly different thing because of the the People's War, and the fact that there was no victor in the Nepal conflict. And so you have these consociational political arrangements, but you do have in the first Constituent Assembly, you had, because of also donor push, because it's a very internationalized process, you got 30% reservations for women in the first Constituent Assembly. And many of these women were Maoist women. These were women who were poor, often barely literate, and so forth. So you had a much, much more mixed bag, and therefore a very, very exciting, initially very exciting process in terms of gendered advancement. But by the time you get the second Constituent Assembly, you've got the power brokers back in and the real decision making out of the Constituent Assembly to the back room where there were only men. The pushback on women's rights and so forth has taken place. What I'm trying to emphasize is the critical thing is not necessarily only getting women in politics, in mainstream politics, but also determining which women and what kind of decision-making power they actually have. Today in Nepal, you have a foreign minister who is Arzu Dioba, the wife of the person who has been Nepal's prime minister off and on for many regimes. She comes from a very elitist background, very bright woman, but it's a question of who does she represent? Do they represent gender politics? Afghanistan is an even more interesting case. You got 30% reservations for women, and they were there in politics. They were provincial governors. They were appointed, and many of them were targeted and killed. But not only that, did these women raise the women's agenda? So I think it's not only enough to count the numbers. It's not only enough for them to get a space, but yes, without that, of course, you're going nowhere. But also, who are the women who are getting in? What is their agenda? What is their relationship with the mobilization of women who were around the table or who were part of this whole mobilization and ferment, that social ferment that took place around the changing of a political culture? And I think that is where the difference comes in. Because we're looking at the Northeast, where really it's been a huge challenge to get even one woman in to the political sphere. Nepal, of course, Kashmir has had Mehbooba Mufti Said and several other women in the political sphere. But if we're talking about peace agreements, and I think that is what we are looking at, peace building, I think that, frankly, we are sometimes too much focused with with numbers and not enough focus with what kind of women, what kind of agenda, and what kind of really relationship do they have with civil society. When there is still a relationship with civil society, you get a much more progressive gender agenda.
Yeah, that's it. I was talking only from that point of view that those women who came to power in Somalia, they also changed the agenda, no, of the nation building. So that's from that point of view I was asking. That they had a mandated power and they could exercise it to rebuild the nation with a very different type of content of development as compared to elitist development. Yeah. So do you think, has it happened? Because all the Human Development Index and UNDP reports and all the inspiring stories that one hears, to what extent the ground reality has changed?
You know, one of the litmus tests is and I'm not sure, as I said, I'm not sure about the Somalia process. What happened to the women combatants? You know, the whole, like in the Nepal context, particularly, if we accept that there were 30 to even 40% women in the people's in the Maoist Revolutionary Army, then what we do know that they were marginalized. We do know that they were stigmatized. We do know that they were largely excluded. And there were we also know, as far as the LTTE women are concerned, and that is 30%, we also know that they suffer from fear and vulnerability, not only from the Sri Lankan armed forces, but also from their own communities. So what I'm asking is that in a lot of these processes, for me, the litmus test is what happens to the combatant women. Are they integrated? are they enabled a chance by even the mainstream women to enter public life or to enter the militaries if they wish? And we have not seen that, at least in the processes that I am familiar with, we've not seen that.
Some of the
Liberia
films
is
made
one.
by Sri Lankan filmmakers, they also have brought in this issue very pointedly. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
But you know, I don't know the Somalia process, so it is possible that, you know, they will show us the way.
So they had come for the International Drama Festival in Mumbai University.
Ah.
So they talked about it. Sri Mukti Sangatna had organized the International Drama Festival, where the women who came from Somalia, very, very different types of dreams and agenda.
Thank you so much,
There
ma'am.
is a question. Yeah.
Now I would like to open the floor for a Q&A session. Participants can either raise their hand or type their questions in the Q&A box or the chat box. I would like to ask Aditi Chaudhary ji to kindly unmute herself and ask the question.
Hello, good evening.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am, for this insightful session. What I actually wanted to say was that this motherhood politics concept, it provides agency to women. I mean, it makes them important elements of peace building. I mean, they offer non-violent resistance, so they hold governments responsible for political violence. So, how can these women help in conflict transformation so that sustainable peace could be established? Also, I have read this book by Maheshwata Devi, that Mother of 1084. I mean, so does it in some way reflect motherhood politics in popular culture? Like the way the journey of mother is shown, how she grieves for her son. So, does this fit in that context somehow?
Thank you. Let me just begin with Maheshwata's. The story that you cited, and which is here. This is one is we're talking about motherhood politics as a collective. Here, this is an individual grieving. So I would not want to collapse the one into the other. What politicizes motherhood is the ability to, or the capacity to bring it into public space, to in fact collectively work through solidarities, to reach out to the protector-predator state. And in this case, it is, if I remember correctly, a mother's grief, to be honored, to be respected, but it's in a different context. The other thing which you said, if I remember, and I should have noted it, about the enabling empowerment, effecting peace building. Now, crucial to peace building is reconciliation. And this is where a lot of the women work. They work at the grassroots level. You have to build peace within the communities. See, why is it that these top-down peace processes have failed? A lot of them have failed because they're top-down. You have to build the community, the coexistence, the harmony, the willingness to acknowledge your separate identities, acknowledge your separateness, your differences, but also the capacity to work together to know that you have to build a shared future. These are not easy processes, and here I think we have a lot to learn from the Sri Lankan women who are working at the local level and who are trying to, in fact, bring Tamil women and Sinhala women and Muslim women together in a way that they are able to focus not only on their separate identities, but issues that are of common concern to them: the economy, impunity, militarization, though militarization sometimes seems to divide them. So these are all projects at work, but it's very important. I mean, the crucial role of women at the grassroots level, at the community level, to build reconciliation. Without building reconciliation at that level, no peace process will work. But I also agree with you that the exclusion of that at some level, women must be enabled to enter or to go past the gatekeepers, the patriarchal gatekeepers, and be part of shaping the peace process. And here you find, I mean, there are these heartbreaking stories of these women who says, my God, for a whole week, I have, blocked the soldiers from entering this space. And now that the negotiations have begun, they've pushed all of us women out. They don't want us anywhere near when the future is to be decided. Our future is to be decided. So one can, it's not that the grassroots is very important. The building up of peace from that level upwards is important. It has to be vertical and horizontal. The sad thing is that women are welcomed, particularly in this new paradigm of resilience as the base of peace building. There is an acceptance of the work of the peace work of women and the need to invest in the peace work of women at the community level, but there is no real acceptance about participation of women in peace processes. I don't see, one of the tragedies of the Women, Peace and Security Programmatic Agenda of 1325 is we keep remembering the protection pillar. We seem to not think the participation, the prevention, the rehabilitation pillars are as important.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you so
ma'am.
much, ma'am. Yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. Participants, do we have any more questions?
Yes, Kushala Simhaji, please go ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Vibhuti, ma'am.
Good evening.
Ma'am, my question is that in your analysis of political motherhood, it serves as a powerful form of resistance. But according to me, it also reinforces traditional roles. So, how can women activists like navigate or push beyond these roles to maintain a long-term influence in the political space?
You're absolutely right when you say that it reifies gender essentialism. Motherhood ensures that, in a sense, the disempowerment of women from political participation. This is why it is considered so comfortable by men. But as I tried to demonstrate with the Naga Mothers Association, they have attempted to do so. They have attempted to push back. They have attempted to enter into representative politics in the modern structure of politics, that is, urban and municipal council elections, that there was a pushback, that they were hounded, that they had to flee and to pull back that agenda. Okay, for now, it's been pulled back, but it's not over. And you find they are rebuilding their strength, they're reestablishing their relevance, and it will happen. It's just that these are the enabling spaces that are there. There are also other kinds of resistance politics, and there is dark agency which I have not talked about, and that is women in movements of political violence. And here there is also a different, of what I call dark agency, whether it is the women in the Maoist movement, whether it is women in the LTTE, whether this is women in the Indian Maoist, or whether this is in fact even the 12%, it is said, women who are in the combatant ranks in some of the Northeast armies, that is the Nagas, in the Nagas. I don't know about Manipur. And so there are, there's a lot of flux. There are experiments, there are changes, but these are not battles that are going to be fought soon. In Nepal, women had started plowing because of the absence of men. They found space to plow, not space, they were obliged to begin plowing. In Sri Lanka, Tamil women were engaged in lagoon fishing. When the men came back, push back, pull back. This is going to happen, but the women will keep at it. And that's why I am very inspired by the Naga story. And I feel that we need to watch it. But I also want to mention one other thing. I hope there are, and I know there are some young researchers here, in browsing the narratives of women, war, and peace, one of the things that will strike you is, yes, there is some mention of internationalized conflicts like Nepal, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, but the Northeast, blank. As far as, and even Nepal and Sri Lanka and, Afghanistan is different. There really isn't that much now. And so there is a lot of opportunity for all of you to do that pioneering research. There's some wonderful work being done in the Northeast by young women. And I hope that many of you will decide to take this up. There is also the whole issue of, which I didn't mention, and that is cross-border networking. That too is a powerful strategy of learning lessons from each other and of best practices. And also of, in fact, agency. The Pakistani women have apologized, and this is the Women's Action Forum, they apologized to the Bangladeshi women for, in fact, the violence, the atrocities, the torture of East Pakistani women in the 1971 war. So there are all kinds of cross-border networks of learning. There are cross-border networks of agency and solidarities.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I hope there are no more questions.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am, for your inspiring and engaging talk with us. It's always a pleasure learning from you. We look forward to having you at our future IMPRI events.
Thank you.
Moving on to the participants' introduction and program discussion. Participants are requested to kindly join as panelists, which will allow you to both unmute yourself and switch on your video as well. Briefly introduce yourselves, including your name, designation, organization, your location, and the reason why you choose this winter school fellowship, tentative topic you would like to work on, and any other things that you want to highlight. Kindly raise your hand and we can start in an orderly manner.
We can start with Aditi ji and followed by Kushila Sinha ji, and then Abhishek Shaw ji, Jana Chakravarti ji, and Shanmati ji. Yeah. Aditi ji, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, hello. Actually, I'm at a family get together and I'm sitting on terrace to attend it. So, is it fine? I mean, there's a lot of darkness here. If I could just speak.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure. Please go.
Yeah. Okay. So, hi, my name is Aditi Chaudhary. I have graduated from Miranda House, and currently I'm pursuing masters in public administration. I have also been working as research analyst with youth-led think tanks like India Youth Diplomacy Forum and covering China sub-entity of the Geostrata. I'm currently based in Jammu. Basically, I've been preparing for civil services. I aspire to be a diplomat. And what was the next question? Do I have to tell
Your top
Your
why I'm joining this, right? So this conflicts that we have been, I mean, the conflicts that have been going around all around us, I mean, even domestically as well. So I mean, this has made me question the. I actually want to understand the nuances of peace building, having studied this kind of this domain as a elective in my college years. So I want to explore this peace building process and how citizens actually contribute to this process. So basically, my research proposal is centered around the interaction and influence the top-down institutional peace processes have on the citizens-led peace building efforts. I mean, how do they actually interact and influence each other, so that so that we don't isolate the top-down ones and not actually take into consideration the ground factors, because local people, I mean, the local sensitivities, cultural factors, they actually play a greater role in resolving the conflicts. So uh, this specific issue, I've taken a case study of South Africa, I mean, post apartheid South Africa. So I will be focusing on that. So is that all?
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you so much.
thank you. Can we move on to the next participant, please?
Yeah, Kushalaji, please go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening to the respected panelists and one and all present here. I'm Kushala. I'm from Hyderabad. I'm honored to be here as a participant in the Law and Public Youth Fellowship Cohort 4.0. My journey in law and public policy has been driven by a commitment for making these fields more inclusive and responsive to realities that are faced by the diverse communities. So, I am a fourth year BA LLB honor student. I'm from Mahindra University School of Law from Hyderabad, Telangana. I have witnessed a first-hand transformative power of inclusive dialogue and effective policy design. So through this fellowship, I hope to deepen my understanding of how we can ensure that peace and conflict resolution policies genuinely reflect the needs of all the stakeholders. And it also further strengthens my ability to resolve to contribute actively to this field. I'm also looking forward to learning from a collaborative and dedicated cohort, as well as the mentors who are shaping this critical conversation. Um, Thank you for the organizers for this, giving me this opportunity, and I'm very excited to embark on this journey with all of you. My tentative research topic is about the post-conflict inclusions of the displacement populations, like how the policies and challenges in this rebuilding lives and communities play a role. Yeah, that's it.
with any specific geographical context?
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to, I have not, like, basically decided on the specific geography area, but the research questions that I had in mind are what are the challenges mainly faced by the populations, displaced populations in the process of, like, say, reintegration and inclusion in the post-conflict settings. So, and also I wanted to elaborate on how this current policies address the social, economic, political inclusiveness or inclusion of this displaced populations. And I thought about writing about the long-term impacts, like including like excluding displaced populations in basically peace building and also reconstruction efforts.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Moving on forward with the next participant, please.
Jana Chakravarti ji, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, good evening to one and all. I'm Jana Chakravarti, and I'm a full-time working professional. I represent an organization called Varahe Analytics. So the conflict resolution and peace building was one of my areas of interest from college. Since I am an alumnus from Christ University, Bangalore, so we had it as one of our elective in my bachelor's course. So I did a bachelor's in economics, media studies, and political science. So that is when I was exposed to this niche, and from then on, I had a avid interest, but then I couldn't really pursue on this. Then my friend had forwarded me about this fellowship, and which is how I got in. My area of interest is studying an inclusive policy action for Sri Lankan Tamil immigrants in Tamil Nadu. So historically speaking, they've been excluded for the most things in Tamil Nadu. So I would like to study and see what are the actual barriers to their social and political inclusion, and sort of see what sort of a policy framework can be approached, catering to their needs.
You speak
And
the language?
yes, ma'am.
And are you going to focus on Madurai or Coimbatore or Chennai? Because
No,
there are
yeah,
clusters of refugees.
yes, ma'am. So I actually live in Tuticorin. So that itself, they itself have a immigrant center here. So I would like to
Yes.
talk to them as well. Yes, ma'am. So
So
really,
are they in a reservation or they are integrated with the local?
few long timers have been integrated well, but but there are a lot of newcomers, and we here they actually lack a lot of counseling centers and all. So that is one thing I still need to study further, ma'am.
But the refugee centers are disbanded, no?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Camps are not there.
No.
But I had visited them long back in the 90s when India signed the peace accords. I
Yeah,
was invited to. I invited to Colombo and Jaffna also. But I missed my flight due to floods in Mumbai, so I ended up in Chennai. From there, I went to Sri Lanka. Yeah, so that time I was taken to all these camps.
Right, ma'am.
Yeah,
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
it's very, very important.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah.
Thanks. Moving on with the next participant.
Shanmati ji, please go ahead.
Hi, good evening. I'm Shanmati. I am a psychologist and I'm also working towards DEIB champion. I am a person with disability, so I've also been working with a lot of uh, accessibility features in terms of intersectional identities in Tamil Nadu in itself. So my work is around making mental health and corporate policies more accessible and more visible of people with disability, especially women of intersection in itself. Yeah, so I have been with my mental health background and my interest in psychosocial aspects of the society. I've been keen on exploring more into advocacy and law and public policy in itself, and that's when I got to know about that fellowship, and I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to step into that aspect of my work too. So right now, with my interest for research, I'm looking at topics related to visibilization of women with disability in women empowerment moments. So in terms of access to these moments or inclusion of women, experiences of women with disability in many of these empowerment moments is what I'm looking at.
So you will be using the lens of diversity, inclusion, and belonging in your dissertation. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Abhishek Shawji. Could you please unmute yourself?
Hello. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
perfectly.
Good evening to everyone. I am Abhishek Shaw. I am a final year student from the Bhawanipur Education Society College from Kolkata. So the reason why I chose this winter school fellowship, it was actually my passion of understanding and addressing the critical issues at the intersection of law and public policy and social justice. And it has been because I have been always involved in the management and leadership roles, and because of the degree I'm pursuing, it is in economics, and my active participation in Model United Nations. Uh, and my tentative topic of research would be just because of my background and interest. And I want particularly to explore the role of economic policies in fostering inclusivity in peace and conflict resolutions, and also examining the case studies of how does economic policy can mitigate these issues, and actually having a critical point of view of peace and analyzing the policy frameworks which can facilitate these outcomes. So this is what I want to research upon.
You mean at a national level or subnational level? Because
On a
some
national
states have
level.
a very good national level. Because this approach varies. No, there are the state where which are completely persecuting and excluding and brutalizing the refugees, while Tamil Nadu has invested a lot in terms of refugee rehabilitation. So, so will you be focusing on the differences that the different states have adopted?
Haven't thought to actually delve into the states, but I want to actually take it as a country as a whole, because the framework or the policy decisions and how does it actually imply into the awareness around the country, and and the contribution of country in the international forums such as United Nations and the discussions over there. So this is my whole idea of having this area of interest.
So you will also bring in the factor of diplomatic relations of India vis-a-vis the countries from where the people are refugees or political asylum seekers are there. So if the state, India has a cordial relation, then the treatment changes, and even the support that state provides.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Abhishek ji. For
but
today,
I think my suggestion is you'll have to narrow down because it's too vast what you have taken. If it is only the critical evaluation of policies, that's fine. But if you are going to combine it with the ground level work, you will have to focus. Are you going to focus on primary data? Hello, Abhishek.
Hello, yes, ma'am.
Are you going to do primary data collection?
Ma'am, I haven't researched or know actually the methodology to do the groundwork till now. So yeah. If I do get chance, then I will surely narrow it down as you suggested it. But for now, I am looking into the framework and the analysis of it.
So you are going through the literature and doing gap analysis and all.
Exactly.
Okay, fine.
Thank you, ma'am. For today, we have, this is all the participants that we had. We have more participants left to introduce themselves. Hopefully, we'll get to meet them in the next session.
But Kushala Sema, Ms. Kushala Sema is there, no?
She introduced?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
She and Jana also did?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, everybody introduced, ma'am, who is still present in the session. There are more that are to be introduced. Hopefully, we'll meet them next Tuesday.
Okay.
Yes, and I'll throw it back to Avi to take ma'am's remarks, and then we'll proceed for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. I request our chair, Vibhuti ma'am, to kindly share her closing remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, I think today's both the speakers, they have raised so many serious issues which are affecting the geopolitics and also the survival of these people, citizens on the planet. And I think they touched upon the philosophical, political, and also existential challenges that the humanity is facing today. So in the 21st century, like we have witnessed that the vibrant theoretical discussion on agnostic peace and the importance of creating space for contestations, plurality, uh, and post-accord reality that have been debated globally as well as in South Asia. But however, there has been very few attempts at embedding uh, the agnostic theory in empirical analysis of peace agreements. Both the speakers, they brought in that particular missing element which we saw, which generally don't find in the literature on peace. So it is very important to ask some of the very uncomfortable questions, that what type of space for interaction are offered in the peace accords and peace negotiations, what forms of inclusion are stipulated, how is the peace agreement framed in terms of conflict termination or the contestation or consensus building. So various indicators, they are uh, uh, put forward historically also in the three accords, Oslo Accord, Belfast Agreement, and Colombian Peace Agreement. But now, some of the new challenges that we are seeing in all those 48 places where the conflicts are there, which may be territorial conflict or the civil war or some of the identity-related politics, which is continuously creating uh, tension and conflicts, mainly because of the militarization and also because of the economic policies and the strict systems and structures that perpetuate inequality and exclusion of certain communities. So I think we need to see the question of lasting peace and sustainable peace in the context of the global macro framework of economic policies, diplomatic policies, and the political structures which different nation states are pursuing. And I think what important discussion that emerged was that for a lasting peace, what we need to deconstruct the issue of power. We should also come up with the liberal ideals and also some of the doable agenda in the peace agreement, as Nepal did to a certain extent. And the principle of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, to what extent that kind of a dream or a goal will allow us to move ahead, and how we can build lasting peace through bottom-up approach by involving the civil society organizations and taking all the important covenants with the United Nations Security Council or the peace, WPS agenda, Women, Peace and Security agenda, popularizing it and taking it to citizens and even the children, the schools, where I was so amazed when I attended the conference of SWANS, South Asian Women's Network Conference in Kathmandu, where people, the ordinary citizens were talking about 1325, no? WPS agenda. So through that extent, like people have become conscious that this is not just a paper tiger or it is just not a platitude, but it has to be experienced in our day-to-day life through the policies and legislations and the certain the governance structures. They also need to implement it in our day-to-day existential reality. So I think I found the day one very, very exciting. It has given us great food of thought and so many things which will be elaborated and gone into much detail with nuanced understanding is in store in this course in the future sessions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With this, I would like to proceed to the formal vote of thanks. As we come to the end of the inaugural day of LPPYF, Law and Public Policy Youth Fellowship, Cohort 4.0, Winter 24, theme Inclusivity in Peace and Conflict Resolution, Rethinking Policy, Advocacy and Implementation, an online national winter school program, a 3-month immersive online law and public policy awareness certificate training course, and internship program. I, Avi Sharma, researcher at IMPRI Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI New Delhi. We are grateful to our chair and experts for today's session, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Mr. Sandeep Chachra ji, and Ms. Rita Manchanda ji for taking the valuable time and bracing us with their thought-provoking and insightful sessions on the inaugural day of this course. It was indeed an insightful start to the course. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. We look forward to welcoming you on next day, that is the day 2 of the certification course on November 19, 2024, Tuesday, by distinguished experts, Professor Swaran Singhji, for a session on new frontiers in global peace, inclusive policy making for cyber conflict resolution, and Dr. Gladstone Xavier's ji for session on navigating displacement and peace, policies and practices for refugee, forced migration and conflict. We would be grateful if you watch us later on YouTube, listen to us on our various podcasts, or read our publications. We hope you continue to join us in the future of our IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning. Wishing you all a good day. Thank you.
Thank you, Avi, for moderating the session.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, IMPRI team.